Thank you for joining. This is our bi-weekly seminars on CISR, and today we were announcing to have a speaker, Anna-Marie from Montana State University, but due to unforeseen reasons, she couldn't make it, and Professor Clement Zuriata from Montana State University also has graciously agreed to step in and give a seminar today. Clem is the site PI of CISR at Montana State University. We collaborate on other CISR project, cybersecurity projects as well. And so this topic is going to be of interest to very many of you. And we will be looking forward to this. Clem is a professor of computer science in the same school that Anna-Marie goes into, the Janford School of Computing. He is also has got a joint appointment at Idaho National Laboratory and Pacific Northwest National Laboratory, both of the laboratories that are close by. His research interests are in quality assurance, which is a subject that will be touched upon a bit, and technical data and cybersecurity. And he leads a big group there with 8 PhD students currently, 4 master's students and 4 undergraduate students, and his lab is called Software Engineering and Cybersecurity Laboratory. And so this is going to be an introduction to the sort of things that are happening there in software quality assurance and some recent activities. Thank you very much, Clem, for stepping in, and this floor is yours, so you can take it away.
Yeah, thank you very much, Asifo, and good afternoon, everyone. First of all, Dr. Reinhold does apologize. It's some things are unforeseen, and she does wish she could have been here. Her research is outstanding, and she's doing a lot of work that is very complementary to the work that's being done here. I certainly hope we have an opportunity to hear from her in the near future. In the meantime, I did give a seminar when we first started the CISR program a couple of years ago. And I talked a little bit about hierarchical models and software quality assurance. And so what I wanted to do today is I'm going to provide a very small primer introduction to this, to the hierarchical software quality models, just so that people are a little bit more aware and refreshed in terms of what we're going to talk about. But I also wanted to discuss a little bit some preliminary results that we've obtained that point at some really interesting complexities associated with aggregating a lot of these values when you're working with these quality models. And I think at the end of this presentation, if we have a little bit of time towards the end, and I certainly hope we do, I'm also going to touch on some of the other research that we're doing in the lab that's also using some of the technology that we're developing with these hierarchical models. So having said that, really quickly, we've been participating in this CISR project for a number of years now. And the participation from our perspective, is not a huge number of students, but it has certainly, I just wanted to let you guys know that it has certainly opened the door to a number of collaborations that have actually grown out of this relationship with WSU, with the University of Idaho, with Central Washington, and some of the other schools that are part of this, some of the community colleges that are part of this. So our participation is typically for cadets, in some cases a civilian. This is the first year we've had a civilian as part of CISR. And these are the various people that are typically involved with our research and with this particular project this year. So the first thing that I wanted to talk about before we go a little deeper into a lot of these hierarchical quality models, let's step back a little bit and talk about, let's give you a primer on some of the things that we do. So think about, there's a lot of models out there. You may have heard of many models that come out of NIST, the National Institute of Standards, the ISO, Institute of International Standards Organization. One of the ones that we've focused on for a number of years is the ISO 25K. There's different numbers associated with this, depending on where you're aiming the quality that you're trying to measure. But most of the theoretical descriptions of a lot of these types of models tend to look like this. They're hierarchical in nature, and they have a top-down breakdown. And so when you look at software product quality, you can look at things like all the ilities that are in front of you: efficiency, compatibility, sustainability, usability, reliability, all of these things. And when you look at each of those, they're broken even more into sub-characteristics. And so what you end up with, if you look at the left-hand side, is basically what I was showing in the prior slide, where you have all of these quality characteristics that get broken down. And some of the standards are listed here, right? The ISOs, the NIST, the risk management framework is a big framework used by the Department of Defense, DHS, and it comprises a lot more than just software components. There's also controls associated with physical aspects of an organization, like should you keep your doors closed, etc. Unfortunately, a lot of these theoretical models don't give you a lot of information in terms of how to measure something. So they'll give you a great description, but they will not tell you what is the metric that you should use, or how do we come together and agree on a particular metric. And so what we did is, many years ago, we started investigating how to operationalize a lot of these theoretical models. We did a lot of literature reviews, and we found some really interesting operational approaches. Some of them are listed here for you. And what they do is they actually implement a version of that theoretical model. Now, of course, the devil's in the details, right? And so how do you know that the implementation is correct? How do you know that the metrics are the right ones to use? How do you know that the tools that are used to feed these models to help you produce a score, are the right tools? Are they giving you the right answers, or, providing you with the right information? So to give you a simple example, here's the software view structure of the CWE 699. And if you go to the MITRE website, you're going to see, you can break this down into different categories and to different measures, et cetera, et cetera. So what you want to do when we're building one of these hierarchical models is you want to try and understand from, at the very top, you're going to have a quality score. Well, a quality score in and of itself is not going to tell you much, because it's, after all, one value. What is the scale associated with that? Can you compare it against anything? It doesn't tell you much. Where you start learning a little bit more about what information is interesting is when you decompose that model and you move one level down. And this is where, in this particular example that you see here, we use the Microsoft Stride, for example, model. And we broke down the top level categories to match with those threats associated with the Microsoft Stride. And then as you go down the tree, it's not necessarily important to know what each of these things are. We have papers on this, but the idea is that the further down you get, the closer you are to a tool that's actually going to measure some artifact in software, be it source code, a binary, an SBOM, a Docker image. And those tools are going to give you a metric, and those metrics are going to feed up in that particular model. And so what we've done, and so that, in a nutshell, that's kind of a primer of some of the prior work that we've done. We've developed a number of models, working in collaboration with some of our partners, some of our contracts and awards that we've worked with. So, but mainly Air Force, Army, Department of Homeland Security. And currently we're in the process of developing additional models. The bottom two that you see there are models that we hope to operationalize to help us inform decisions about cloud, specifically Azure, and some of the industrial control systems that are out there. The work that you see here, the last two, are in collaboration with Washington State, plays a big part in helping us do this work. And of course, associated with a lot of these models, we also have another group of researchers, specifically also at Washington State, that are helping us develop some of the visualization techniques that we'd like to have associated with this particular models. The lower you go in the model, you're going to have more detailed descriptions of what you're seeing, meaning your customer is typically going to be a developer because they want to know, why is that metric so low, or what's wrong with that particular tool? How is it feeding the model as you move up that hierarchy? And if you look at the model top down, the higher levels are typically associated with management. Management wants to see the pretty pictures, the flashing red lights. You know, what happened? Why is my quality score all of a sudden dipping over the last week? What happened? And so these are the techniques that Dr. Arnova Venera at Washington State is helping us develop. So we started doing this a number of years ago, actually. But over the last couple of years, we started really focusing on more of the security aspects. So think of security tools that are feeding into these models to help us understand the security of a system. As we started looking at these various models, we've had a couple of students who developed a number of models, and we were getting scores, right? But you know, if you change the tool, or if you tweak things a little bit, if you tweak the environment, if you tweak the configuration of the tool, all of a sudden scores start going all over the place. So this led to the group that we have here at MSU to start looking at variability associated with this diversity of sources. This is, by the way, Dr. Anne-Marie Reinhold, who couldn't be here today, has been a huge part leading a lot of the efforts under these areas. Some of the different sources of information that you feed into this model are problematic, and this is nothing new. You know, the problem of aggregation is a well-known problem, but it's not how do you just aggregate the data. It's also how do you normalize the data that is coming from multiple sources. Some of that data can be categorical. Some of it can be on an ordinal scale. Some of it can be on a ratio scale. How do you make sense of all of this together? We have to acknowledge that the variability associated with a lot of these vendors, the tool versions, third-party software environments, all of this influences the assessment that you carry out. And of course, a really big part of this is that a simple error, and this goes back to error theory, there's an entire subject on error theory, propagates, right? So depending on the types of operations that you're using, that error that you calculate on an initial tool can propagate in different ways and can sometimes become exponential as you move up a hierarchy. So these are all sources of variability and the diversity of the sources that make this problem actually quite interesting, especially in our space. We want to give our stakeholder confidence that the models that we're deploying are somewhat accurate. So a couple of things that we did in a study that we've recently done, and this is a study that is under review currently, we had two specific goals. The first goal was to report on the high variability of static analysis tools. And what you can see in this picture are 6 different potential sources of diversity associated with that goal. Our second goal was to report on the different techniques that can be used to aggregate results from multiple sources, right, from multiple vendors. And so these were 2 specific goals that we wanted to go after, and we've done some experimentation with them, and I wanted to share some of the things that we found from them. Now, probably over the last 10 years, our team, the Software Engineering and Cyber Lab, has really explored a number of static analysis tools that evaluate a range of software artifacts. In this particular, and so what we did here is we're trying to synthesize a lot of this information, but looking at tools that focused on binaries, source code specifically, Docker containers, and software bill of materials, or SBOMs. So what you see in here is really a cross-reference of sources of variability on the left, on the first column, and what you see on the top row are basically all the different domains that we've explored, right? And so the values that you see in each of these cells is basically represents our experience. This is just our experience. with the work that we've done. And so whenever you see something that says publish, this indicates studies that we've done in our lab where we published the work. Work in progress, or WIP, this is areas that we're looking at. Expected really indicates that the source of variability is something that's irrelevant, using a combination of probably abductive reasoning, and incorporates a lot of our previous experiences and expert knowledge. And the suspected, it really an indication that we suspect that the sources of variability are important based on either abductive reasoning or expert knowledge. And so again, this is a table where it's impossible for us to look at every one of these cells, but we're going to try and exemplify some of this in the examples that follow here. So goal 1 focuses on delineating the problem of reliance on one version of a static analysis tool. And this is really interesting when we're focusing on this problem, because we typically, I myself, I'm a trained software engineer. I spent many years in industry, and we're very bad at selecting tools. We typically tend to focus on the latest version of a tool because we think it's the latest and greatest. This has the prettiest colors, and we tend to ignore everything else. So this is a really interesting problem. The second goal offers a little bit of an unbiased tool-agnostic solution that one of our students, and I see her present here in our participant list, which is great, because if we get any really hard questions, I'm going to point to her. But what it does is we basically we've developed a technique for aggregating tool findings from multiple sources, and Redempta and Dr. Anne-Marie Reinhold have been leading this particular effort. So the experimental methods that we used in this space, we first focused on for goal 1, we focused on experimentation that was done on binary analysis tools. We picked 2 of them, CVE binary tool and CWE checker. The specific of both of these tools are listed in another publication that we have. And we evaluated approximately 660 publicly accessible binaries from Kali Linux. Okay, and what we did is we evaluated them with multiple versions of each of these tools. So what we did is we kept one of those binaries constant, and we applied multiple versions of a tool to the same binary. You would expect that the number of vulnerabilities or the findings from tools would remain relatively constant. And if it didn't, you would think that maybe a README file or release notes would tell you, you should expect the following changes on what we did. We did something similar also with another student that Dr. Reinhold has led. And this is with Docker images analysis tools. And we used tools Gripe and Trivy. And you see there that we focused on 163 different Docker images. The experimental method that we used for the second goal, which is the idea of how can we aggregate results from all this multiple diverse set of tools. This is a process that was developed by one of the PhD students, Redempta Munzi. And basically, the process is that if you look at the first, if you go through each of the steps here, first you have software artifacts that are assembled into some collection. And this could be binaries, could be source code, could be images, etc. In step 2, all of these software artifacts in that collection, you want to evaluate them using a number of different software analysis tools. In step 3, what we do is all of the findings for all of these software artifacts are evaluated by all the static analysis tools, and we aggregate those. Okay, and so we come up with a nice table. What that does is it gives us a distribution of the counts of findings that are created, and that's what you see in step 4. Now, if we jump to step 5 on the bottom left, an end user wants to run some brand new artifact, a new target that we want to run our tools against, right? Through the same static analysis tools, the same tools that we used in step 3. And so what happens is we come up with a score for some new artifact of interest. And let's say, for example, in this particular example, we have a count of 40 for a particular finding, right? Then in step 6, what we've done is you've created a probability density function. And this was basically created from created from step 4, okay, from the distribution of the findings, where you have a histogram of all that information. We've now generated a density function for this. And so what you see is that you see a red dot there, and the count of the finding in that new software artifact of interest is going to receive a score between 0 and 1. It's a PDF. And so this is based on the position where it is in the PDF. And so all the findings for the new artifact are scored with this density-based benchmarking procedure. So this process really depends on us having a quality benchmark that we can measure against when you're looking at a new artifact, okay? So what are the results that we got for the first goal? Remember, the first goal, we were trying to look at the stability of the scores when you change the version of a tool, okay? So we're looking at the total number of findings versus the static analysis tool. And so on the x-axis, you see the version of a tool, and on the y-axis, you see the total counts of findings for each of those different tools, okay? So what you see here, if you look at, if you focus on figures A and B, figure A has the CVE binary tool and the CWE checker in a collection of binaries that had 660 binaries that we were looking at. And in graphs C and D, you have Trivi and Gripe, which is looking at the collection of Docker images, which we had 163 of them. So the x-axis corresponds to the version, and the static analysis tool indicated in the panel is indicated in the panel. And basically each point represents the total number of findings that each of those static analysis tools identified in that collection, okay? So what you see is variability. And what you see is that the total number of findings associated with one particular image, for example, or one particular binary, as you move to the right longitudinally through the different versions, has a lot of variability. In some cases, you see some consistency where you look at Gripe, for example, but all of a sudden you see a big dip. And so you're left wondering, boy, what happened between version 6 and version 7? Should I be using this tool? Should I be using the prior tool? And so this points at a really interesting finding, you know, this variability that we need to be aware of when we're developing models. In our second goal, the results, this is for the aggregation from multiple sources. We basically, the student, our PhD student, has successfully implemented this procedure to basically scale results from static analysis tool that evaluate, you know, different sources. And in total, you know, this, I think this study amounts to about 13,000 software artifacts that were scored with this approach. And so what this has done is has helped us facilitate the aggregation of static analysis tool results into quality assurance models. So the scaling procedure, what you see here, is actually quite robust across distributions. What you see particularly here, we just have 3 distributions to exemplify this. And what you have is the findings generated, the frequency on the upper row, and then on the bottom row, we generate the probability density functions associated with those findings. So when something new comes up, like the little red dot represents a new target, we can tell you a score and how it does compared to the rest of that particular benchmark. Benchmarks are different. When you look at a benchmark of a collection of items, they're going to have different distributions. And so this is critical for us when we're scoring a brand new target to measure how it is doing against a representative set of similar software that is out there. Okay? There is a special case on the last column that you see there, and this is when you see a constant set of number, when you have the same number. For example, in this particular case, we had a whole bunch of zeros associated with one, and then we create a special case for that constant value, and we give it either top score or a score of 0 for, you know, for quality, for the aggregation of that score. So, okay. So what are the lessons learned as we continue to develop this work, right? We're still doing this. Assessing all of these sources of variability simultaneously is really complex. And we're trying to understand the nuances of all of these sources of variability. I firmly believe that parsimony is king in this particular case, and so the simpler you keep things, the better. We're able to offer a primary classifications for sources of variability. And so this is work that we're trying to align so that we can develop a better taxonomy. Examples of some of the sources are diversion, environment, vendors, etc. The versions of variability, the sources of variability. We're also looking at solutions that we present for aggregate. The solution that I just presented, that our PhD student Redempta has developed with Dr. Reinhold, is applicable, for information across a wide range of sources. And so this is important because in a lot of these complex E-type systems, there isn't an oracle that can tell you what a correct answer is, right? And so you need to use different techniques. In this particular case, we're saying, hey, compared to the rest of the world that plays in that space, this is how you look. And that is one approach at looking at this particular problem. Okay. And of course, there's the compounding of uncertainty, which is inevitable, and it's going to have side effects as you aggregate, as you move up a particular tree. So these are some of the nuances that we have seen as we're developing a lot of these hierarchical quality models. And I'll show you in a second where we want to put those different models. But what you see here from left to right is the hierarchical quality model development, which you see on the left-hand side. In the middle, you see what we can think of as a pipeline for quality assurance, meaning you have all of these tool outputs, you have the model inputs, you have a pipeline that feeds into the output, and that pipeline has all of these aggregation issues that we need to think about, the normalization issues that we need to think about to create these quality models. And then the third column that you see here is the risk communication. So although we're working to produce really nice visualizations of dashboards that flash red lights so it can help a developer all the way up to the C-suite of folks in industry, there's an aspect associated with risk, and this is the communication of that risk that is imperative if you're going to have somebody if you're going to want to move the needle and have somebody actually perform a duty or go and perform an action before this becomes too bad. And that communication requires a lot of skill. And this is the work that Dr. Reinhold has been working on. And I wish if she had been here, she'd be focusing on just the risk communication part and using techniques like generative models to produce different missives that can be used to affect the right target. Different targets speak different languages. Even if you're in Montana, different towns that live in different areas have different vernaculars. And so you have to adjust those messages if you want to affect the actions on the population. And so the risk communication of the cybersecurity events that we see are critical in being able to do that. So the work that is being done is trying to move the target population a little bit closer to where the experts are in terms of the perceived probability of a breach. And so in order to do that, you have to use the right language and the right communication between them. Okay. All right. Now, what are some of the other, and I have a few minutes here to tell you a little bit more about some of the other projects that we're working on. We're also developing hierarchical models to assess the quality of bill of materials. For those of you who are not familiar with bill of materials, these have emerged since about 2018 as a relatively new technology that is pretty much critical in software security, especially in the supply chain. And CISA in particular is behind organizing a lot of the community engagement. And so the idea is, how can we measure, how do you trust an SBOM? If I give you an SBOM and I say, this represents this particular software, how do you know the quality of that SBOM is correct? So first of all, for those of you who are not familiar with an SBOM, think of it as a list of ingredients that make up a software system. So much like food, which contains a label, software, excuse me, should also be sold with its label. here's all the peanut allergies for your software. In other words, here's some of the components if you're in your software that have known vulnerabilities. You may still be okay with that because maybe you're not using those APIs in the SBOM, but you should be aware of what you're getting, right? So what we're trying to do is replace or develop these hierarchical models that I was talking about earlier and measure the quality of the SBOM itself. And there are two aspects to this. One is, what is the quality of the content of the SBOM? In other words, does the software meet a certain level before I want to deploy it in my organization? And the second aspect is the SBOM constructed properly? SBOMs have a format that they need to adhere to. Is who built this SBOM? Do I trust the person who built it? Is it built correctly? And so there's a number of things that we need to be, does it have a certificate associated with it so we can trust it? And so these are all new areas of research that are popping up that we're certainly investigating right now with some of the current awards that we have. Another area that we're looking at, you saw that when you peel this apart and you look inside one of these models, you're going to see a lot of connections between the nodes on this hierarchy on the tree, okay? And so what you're going to see is, in many cases, we manually adjust the weights that correspond to your perception of quality. And so if I'm not interested in security as much as I'm interested in maintainability of software, I'm probably going to weigh maintainability higher than security. Well, as the number of entities tends to expand and the number of sub-characteristics on these quality models begin to grow, then what happens is there's a combinatorial problem, and the weights associated with this is not something that is tractable, especially if you're going to do it manually, right? So we're using techniques in machine learning. We're using ChatGPT. This is Dr. Brad Whitaker and his students in our project. And what he's doing is using ChatGPT to generate code. We feed that code into these models, code that is known to have vulnerabilities, code that doesn't have vulnerabilities. And that is helping us train and find the weights associated with these peak models so that we can have even finer accuracy with these techniques. Associated with machine learning models, how do we know if the machine learning model is actually correct? Or there's two aspects to this, right? The machine learning model, when we're testing it, is the model not performing because it wasn't trained properly? Or is the model not performing because there's a bug in the actual code that generates that model? And so one of the areas that we have a couple of students working on is using techniques called metamorphic testing techniques, and these are fairly known techniques that can be used when you don't have oracles, right? When you don't have a system that can tell you, yes, that is the right output, no, that is not the right output, you pass, you fail. We use these metamorphic techniques, which is basically you come up with a whole bunch of relationships that you expect to be there, and you expect the relationships to hold when you have follow-up test cases. To give you a simple example, if I have a set of numbers and I run them through a program under test, and I tell that program to sort those numbers, I'm going to get some output. If I have a metamorphic relation that says, let's add a delta number to all of the input numbers on the array and generate a follow-up test cases with those numbers, then the output should also be in order. And so the relationship should still be maintained, even though the input changed slightly. So understanding the relationship helps us understand the testing, because we don't know what the exact output is going to be, okay? And I wanted to point out just a couple of more projects that we're working on. One is in the decomposition of security zones and sensitive sections of source code. We're also developing peak models, hierarchical models that, given new tools that are able to identify certain zones in your source code, are going to give you a score associated with the code in terms of, this is how sensitive your code is, or this is how how you're violating certain security zones associated with that particular piece of software. We're focusing on the decomposition of CWE 200, but there are different ways in which we can do this. A lot of the work here has been done by the University of Hawaii. Formerly, the lab from Medi was at Rochester Institute of Technology. The last section that I wanted to cover is we're also working on techniques to obfuscate codes on FPGAs. And so we move now from all of the software techniques that we are focusing on, which is really on hierarchical quality assurance. However, and you have to be honest about this, right? When it doesn't matter how robust the solution you have, if somebody's attacking your firmware or if somebody's attacking your hardware. And so in collaboration with Dr. Lemires, who's also part of our lab, we've taken some technology that he's developed over the years to recover from radiation. When you send a circuit up into space, right, it's subject to radiations, and so you can get bits that flip. And so he has recovery techniques where the computer, where we're using FPGAs or field programmable gate arrays, so a programmable circuit. And so what we can do is when radiation hits that circuit, you can, because you have other cores in that particular circuit, you can recover that lost core that doesn't agree with the rest of them. Okay, and you can do that with FPGAs. So if you can recover from radiation when you send a circuit up in space, why can't we use the same techniques to recover when a malware attack happens? And so if a malware attack happens, let's use similar techniques and we can obfuscate a lot of opcodes inside our FPGA, and we can recover when somebody's trying to attack our system. We can detect it, and then we can say, let's flush that and let's put the correct bits back in place. So this is another area that has been really interesting to work on. In future work, what we're trying to do is we're going to develop these hierarchical models, these quality models that we've been developing. We're working with Pacific Northwest National Labs. And what we're trying to do is the electrical vehicle infrastructure is growing, right? And we are seeing a lot of cars now hit the streets that are electrical vehicles, and you have your stations. They're connected to the power grid. And so there's a lot of programmable logic controllers, industrial control system components that go into this electrical vehicle landscape. And we're trying to see if we can use similar hierarchical quality assurance techniques to see if we can identify potential areas where disharmonies and malware could infect the particular system. So at a very high level, you have a happy user on the right-hand side. He uses the internet to access some management station, right? And this is where you keep record keeping, authorization, authentication of things. This is connected to charging pools, which basically are associated with all of the different charging stations, right? And all of your charging pools and the charging stations are in the power grid. They're connected to the power grid. Okay, so of course, a lot of these things are subject to all sorts of different attacks. And we're already seeing some of these attacks. We're already seeing people manipulating the charging processes. We're seeing how power variations in the power grid can affect the different charging stations. We're seeing people doing denial of service attacks on the HMIs of a particular ICS. And so the idea is to introduce these peak models that you see there, the little peaks, so that we can detect some of these attacks or improve the quality of the components that are going to go into this infrastructure by comparing it against the benchmark of already existing technology associated with these particular threat models. So in a nutshell, this is kind of the work. Hopefully I've covered, I provided you with an abridged description of a lot of the work that we're doing in this lab, all really centered around these hierarchical quality models. Now, other things that we're doing with our lab, we have a book club. We have, for all the kids that are participating in the CYSER program, We have an independent study credit that students get for participating in the book club. We have a hacker group that works on this. We read a number of books. Anybody's welcome to participate in these particular discussions. And we have a number of research collaborations associated with the work that we do. Front and center, of course, are Homeland Security and CISA, because they've been the marquee sponsors of a lot of the work that we're doing. But we're certainly, you know, a lot of the work, you know, as you well know, the degrees of separation between different projects is quite close. And I think, you know, I met Asifo through all of these CISR components, and we developed relationships to expand our research across multiple projects and different awards. And so the benefits associated with all of this research is certainly interconnected. And so that's pretty much where we are. And of course, you know, a lot of the work that we do, you know, wouldn't be possible without all of the students and the people that we have in our lab. Some of these guys are already gone, and we have new ones already, but I'm not going to be fixing this slide anytime soon. So with that, you know, we have 7 minutes for Q&A, and hopefully I didn't, hopefully I provided you with a good breadth and a good overview of what we're doing in our lab.
Thank you very much, Clem. That was a very nice overview, in fact. And for those of you who joined a bit late, we were scheduled to have Dr. Anna-Marie Reinhold today to speak about risk communication, and that could not happen for unforeseen reasons. We will reschedule that. I hope to have her during the semester. If not, then we will have her in next semester. But Clem has done a wonderful job, both to give an overview of the things that happen there within the CISR activities in his lab, but also a preview to what that risk communication work that Dr. Reinhold is leading could look like. So this was excellent, Clem, and thanks for stepping in and giving us this. We have some time, so you can unmute yourselves and ask questions. You could also use the chat to ask your questions. Let's try to get in a few questions if possible. James, I'm not sure if you would like to put the survey. This was not for Clem's planned talk, but we can still take the survey. Students would provide feedback, and that will also be one way to get CISR students your attendance in, even though Teams does a good job doing that automatically for us, and we do. It would be great to have that. So if, James, that makes sense, and if you have the link, please put it on and take the time to do that. And while you get the link and complete it, let me see if anybody's got questions for Clem.
Yeah, so there's the link. Thanks for the reminder, Asfa. And I did have a question for Clem as well.
Sure, go ahead.
With the software quality assurance stuff, it sounds like most of what you do is static analysis. At least that's what you talked about. Have you looked at doing also dynamic or like runtime data, or does that bring a whole host of other problems with it that you're trying to avoid?
No, that's actually a great question, right? And of course, there's a lot of you can do proper analysis without going into the dynamic realm as well. We're exploring that possibility. I think we've focused on the static analysis because that has been the mandate that has come down from the award organizations. But it's also interesting to think about, you know, we're measuring quality. And so what does it mean if we're looking at real-time data or we're doing execution? We're not in the business of reinventing the tools. We don't want to do that. There's enough people and enough companies with a lot of money doing a lot of these tools that, whether they do dynamic or static analysis. What we're doing is, given the tools that your organization is using, can we somehow generate a model that aggregates and gives you a holistic score from all of the tools that your organization focuses on? So if a new group of people have a whole bunch of dynamic analysis tools that they want to use, we would have to look at all of these dynamic analysis tools. Does it make sense to aggregate their scores in some way? And what does quality mean in the sense of dynamic analysis? And that's an area that we haven't explored yet, but it's ripe for research. I haven't seen any tools that aggregate scores from multiple dynamic analysis tools to give you to give you a holistic sense of what you have.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Mm. Yeah.
Anyone else got any other questions?
I have a question.
Sure, go ahead, Jaran.
So you mentioned creating a score for some code. Are you familiar with ELO, or on some games that there's scores that adjust for many players?
No, I guess I haven't explored that. Do you have a link that you can put in the chat? That would be great too. But yeah, and maybe you can tell me a little bit more how you think that would fit in here.
Well, if it requires like many codes and many adversaries, is I guess you could say. So this can't be applied directly, but it's an idea to create relative scores from one code to another.
Okay, and it's called ELO.
ELO system. It's more it's related to game theory. I am trying to find the chat.
Yeah. No, I appreciate that. I'm not familiar with that particular branch of research.
And there has been updates to this, but this was like the original kind of game theory rating systems to give each player scores and how well they perform.
Yeah, that's excellent, and that gives us another area to take a look at. Yeah, rating systems is an area that's very it's subjective, to say the least. And so if you look at for example, if you look at CWSS and CVSS, these are scoring mechanisms that the MITRE group has put together based on community involvement. If you look at the actual definition of the equations themselves, a lot of those equations sometimes don't make a lot of sense. And they use, although you can add and multiply anything that you want in the world, sometimes it doesn't make sense to multiply certain things together. And so you get into the meaningless of the actual equations that are there. And there's a lot of controversy associated with some of these CVSS, CWSS scores. I'm not familiar with the one that you put here, the ELO rating system, but I tend to be by nature skeptical until I peel the onion and see what's underneath the hood. And I would have to look at how the rating is done and how the calculations are made. But I really appreciate that that information. Thanks, Jaron.
Sure, thanks.
Anyone? We can get in one last question, maybe in the time where very quickly, Clem, and you can be very brief on answering this. The error analysis you mentioned, which is an area on its own. Are you thinking more about what people do in numerical computations and see what error analysis means there, or are you thinking somewhere else? Is it just curious?
No, that's correct.
Yeah, okay.
In fact, we wrote a paper on error analysis as it pertains to technical debt associated with systems. And so most people were just calculating principal, and I'm not going to go into the definition of all of these things, but the principal associated with technical debt, and they used all of these equations and functions, but nobody talked about the error margins. And so it's really important to look at the error margin associated with the variable, because if you multiply two variables and each of those two variables have a certain error, then the error margin now increases.
Yes.
And of course, there's different, the margins do different things depending on the operations that you do. And of course, that's not new. I mean, that all goes back to engineering and error analysis. But applying it, we can't just blindly trust all of these tools and scores because we work in cybersecurity. We need to look at what are the error boundaries, and we need to be thinking about this. This is why we, after all, are the scientists, and the developers are expecting us to give them that information, right? So, but anyway, that's right.
Perfect. Completely agreed. Amen to that statement you just made. So thank you very much, Clem, again, for a very nice talk. We got a lot out of it, and hopefully all of you have done the same. We will get back 2 weeks from now, and we will announce that, and keep an eye out for announcement for what that seminar is going to be. Thank you again, and have a great day.
Thank you, guys.
Right. Thanks.